Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Math with Mr. W. This morning, we're talking about simplifying square roots. Simplifying square roots. Square roots. We're going to try and make them easier to understand, but we first have to understand what our perfect squares are. What are our perfect squares are? What are the perfect squares? So, you should have a list of perfect squares. One doesn't help us because it just changes nothing. 1 times 8 is still 8. 1 times 25 is still 25. 1 times 150 is still 150. So it doesn't fix anything. But if we then have the next perfect square is 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. Then we have 49, 64, 81, and 100. So these are our first 9 important perfect squares. And you should have those written down. Those need to be on a list. Okay? And those are the numbers we're going to use to simplify our square roots. So when I look at the square root of 8, I ask myself, are any of these numbers, and there's only one that's possible, a factor of 8? That is, it has to be smaller than that, and it has to multiply by something to make 8. And of course, you understand that it's not. It's 4. That 4 times 2 makes 8. So this are exactly the same. But then there's a rule. The rule says that the square root of a times b is equal to the square root of a times the square root of b. I split the two up. So here they were in the same room, and now I put them into 2 different rooms. They were multiplied in the same room. They're multiplied in 2 different rooms. Cool, isn't that? All right. So we got to get that settled first. Now, look at this. Now I have the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. So the square root of 2 is irrational. We know that. You can't fix that. But we know what the square root of 4 is. It's 2. So we then get 2, because this can be changed. This cannot. So it's 2 times the square root of 2. So to simplify the square root of 8, we get 2 times the square root of 2. That's simplifying a square root. We get rid of the factors inside the number that are perfect squares. Let's try another one. 48. And the first thing that probably comes to your mind is 6 times 8. But 6 and 8 aren't perfect squares. We're looking for a number that's a perfect square. So we have to find something else inside 48 that's a perfect square. And hopefully they'll come up with, because now, well, here's manipulation. If they double the 8, they get 16. But then they take half of 6, that's 3. So 16 and 3 is the same as 8 and 6. So we get 16 times 3. Now we know that this is a perfect square. So that helps us. We get the square root of 16 times the square root of 3. But we know the square root of 3 is irrational. It doesn't change. You can't fix it. It's just what it is. Root 3 is root 3. So now you want to change the square root of 16 because that's a nice round 4. So 4 root 3. 4 root 3. And now, when they're doing their first 100 integers, they're doing the first 100 integers because we talked about this when we were doing another video. We talked about taking square roots, okay? And we talked about simplifying in that little video, but we didn't do it as well, I don't think, as we did here. And the importance of knowing your perfect squares. So your students have to know the perfect squares, and they have to know how to factor using those perfect squares. They have to know which ones they can use. So now 27. What number goes into 27 that's a perfect square? And they immediately should be able to think of 9. So we have 9 times 3. And of course, just like the law says, this becomes the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. Now, once I've broken those two up into separate rooms, I now can look at it and say, okay, what is the square root of 9? It's 3. And I rewrite that as a whole number, 3. But root 3 can't change, so it's 3 root 3. So when they're doing their simplified square roots from 1 to 100, when they get to 27, it better say 3 root 3. And you're doing a lot of practice with this. The numbers are going to get bigger, but give them numbers that you know have things that you know have ones that they can recognize. If you gave them the square root of 125, they know that 25 goes into that evenly. Because that's 5 quarters. So they know that this is going to be 25 times 5. Because 25 goes in here, and it's a perfect square. They're looking for numbers that are perfect squares that go in there evenly. So, again, this becomes the square root of 25 times the square root of 5. Now, what happens to this? It turns into a 5, because that's what it is. And this is just what it is, root 5. Because you can't fix root 5. Root 5 is an irrational number, so we end up with 5 root 5. So the square root of 125 is defined as 5 root 5. So go through many of these. Practice, practice, practice. Over and over and over again. Give them quizzes on these. Just over and over. Don't be afraid to put it in your warm-ups. Make sure that they understand what it's all about. I'm looking for two numbers whose product is 72 and they add up to what? They add up to 17. That's easy, 9 times 8. But what if you said they add up to 38? Oh, what? That's 36 times 2. So they have to know all these things. They got to get those factors in their heads. Make sure they understand their factors. If they can't multiply, then they've got to practice. Don't let any student let you know or think that they can't multiply. Give them a chart of multiplying. Make them learn it. You don't want any of them to grow up asking, what's 4 times 5? I know that you're going to do a great job. I know your kids are going to do a great job. You have a great day and a great year. And I'll see you next time on Math with Mr. W.